The power of stories is what shapes the lives of adventurers. And this is what we're going to talk about today when we discuss what is Myth Tales of Legend, a brand new role-playing game where stories empower our heroes. I'm Ross Watson. I'm the lead designer of Myth Tales of Legend.
And I'm JM DeFoggi, and I'm the lead writer of Myth Tales of Legend.
And as you can see, we are not actually broadcasting from our awesome studio in Colorado Springs. We are instead broadcasting from our homes.
Mm-hmm.
JM
I missed the studio.
I know, right? Quarantine is what's doing it to us this time. So please forgive us for the production values, but we will get better. This is the first of what we're calling our Myth Campfire Chats. And the Campfire Chats is going to be discussions of Myth Tales of Legend with JM and myself as we go over what the game is and what it's about and how you can play and the different mechanics and things that are inside of it. This is just the first episode of what we hope will be many. So today's episode, the first episode, we are talking about just one question. What is that question, JM?
What is Myth Tales of Legend?
Good question. What is it?
So it is a new fantasy RPG that Ulysses is going to be putting out that's based off of the Myth board game. The Myth board game has been out for a while. There's been a recent Kickstarter for a new book for it, and they're actually going to be relaunching it, right? They're going to be doing a new edition of it, Ross?
Yeah. So the book was the world of, it's called the World of Myth, and I'm sure that we can find a link somewhere.
Yes, we will have a link.
Or in the show notes somewhere for you to go check that out. And that is a book that covers a lot about the setting, and it comes from the board game. It's beautiful. And JM and I actually wrote some stories in it, so definitely check that out. And there is going to be a new edition of the Myth board game. It's called Myth Dawn of Heroes, but we are not the board game guys.
Nope,
so
not at all.
We can talk about it from a distance, like as a very distant thing, but that's not really our area of expertise.
I know it exists. That's
we
where
know,
it's at
on
my radar.
Yes. So one thing about Myth Tales of Legend that's important to get across right away. This is a classic role-playing game in that it has a dice pool system. There is a game master. There are players. It uses a dice system actually very similar to the one that was used in Wrath and Glory. And we're calling this dice system the Campfire system. So just you'll find out why that is later on when we go through this. It does have some narrative elements, Myth Tales of Legend does, but it is not a story game. Let me be really clear about that. I love story games, think story games are cool, but my heart has always been like in the more traditional role-playing game mechanics, so that's where the design of Myth is rooted. But so let's talk about who you are, what you're doing, and why in the world of Myth. JM, take it away.
So in Myth Tales of Legend, you are playing. You are heroes. I mean, that's kind of the term that we use for the PCs, but you are novices. You are just stepping out on your tales of adventure. The old trope of the farm boy who picks up his father's sword to go out and slay monsters. You look up to that guy because he has a sword. Much like the board game, your starting gear is... it almost feels like the gear of opportunity or desperation. For example, if you are the soldier in the game, you may find yourself starting off with a pot lid and a fire poker, and that's one of the drives for kind of the initial story of your Myth campaign is let's get some better gear. Like we're doing what we need to survive right now, but if we're going to keep down this path, we really need to kind of step off from there. And
I think your equipment actually is a good indicator of going from that, I've just decided to step out of my farm and become an adventurer to the, now I have a sword and a shield. I feel like I'm an actual warrior. And that's an interesting, like getting there is part of that interesting story we want to tell.
And really our heroes...
while you're out there, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, really our heroes, they take the roles of those who, for whatever reasons that you decide for your characters, you are the ones who are standing against this corruptive, evil force that is just really baked into the setting of Myth, known as the Darkness. And so really it is the story of the heroes versus this this force that wants to see everything that is like creative and hopeful and sustaining, so like civilization and the species of myth and all of the things that your characters are going to love and want to defend. The darkness wants to kind of tear it all down and reduce it to rubble.
Now, the darkness is not some kind of cartoon villain. It is actually a very behind-the-scenes sort of cosmic force that's acting in many ways, and often very, very subtle ways. In fact, there's a lot of people in the world of myth who aren't really sure that the darkness even exists as a cosmic force. But we'll get into all of that later. We just wanted to kind of give you a quick overview of what the game is about. And I think the next step is we want to talk about what kind of characters can you play in the world of myth. And I think the best place to start there is to talk about the different species that you can play.
Oh, yeah. I think that... So it is... myth has a lot of traditional fantasy sort of baked in. So you're going to find elves and dwarves and humans. But we really have sort of three additional species that have been seen in the board game. One that has only been seen in pictures in the board game. And we have...
That's right.
We have given those as options for... you to play as heroes. So the first one that outside of kind of the traditional ones are the Spriggans. So the Spriggans were awakened by the elves at some point in the past to be defenders of the forest, the forest that is being destroyed and slowly shrinking and splitting up into different areas. And they've diverged from the elves. They both see different ways of protecting the forest. But if you want to play, like an ambulatory tree, that's where you're going to want to go. It's fun. They have a lot of great mechanics that we're going to talk about later in another video, the World of Myth video. But that's kind of one of the first ones. Ross, do you want to take one of the other ones?
Yeah, sure. So we have a couple of anthropomorphic races. One are called the Hurani, and they're essentially rat people. They had a very large civilization at one time, but that civilization has been sundered due to the machinations of the darkness, and now they're sort of a broken people with a large portion of their former empire has become this sort of degenerate villains, really. Like they're the monsters that are now sort of fallen under the sway of the darkness, and the few Hurani who remain are those who are on the sort of fringes of that civilization, and they are very well suited to stealth, and they're quick. And they have this really interesting cultural element that JM likes. JM says it in a really cool way. He says that the Hurani kind of reject the absolutes of the darkness and the light, and they live sort of in the middle. And they have this sort of almost worship. They believe in something called the shadow, which is their home.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. There's a lot going on with Hurani that just make them an interesting species. And then we also have, this is the one that Jane was talking about before, in pictures in the board game, you saw these beings that were kind of like an anthropomorphic mongoose. And we have built them in this, JM worked on this great background for them and everything, and they're called Tavians. And they are this very noble species from an island that's sort of away from the main area of myth. And they come from a place with a lot of rich culture and nobility and honor, and they bring a lot of those aspects with them into the main world of myth now that they're sort of here. And we'll get into more of that when we talk about the world of myth, but they're really interesting. And mechanically, of course, Tavians are super quick. And they're the only species that gets a straight up bonus to their defense to make them harder to hit. So if you want to play a Tavian, you're going to be the guy that's going to be kind of like dodging a lot of stuff. They're very cool.
We also have archetypes, and we want to make it clear that while some may be predisposed to certain archetypes, you can mix and match however you want. But the archetypes is sort of the other way that you can build, make your character unique and stand out. And we have some familiar ones like soldier and brigand, archer and hunter and monk, but we also have some pretty fun ones that are not ones that you normally see, or interesting takes on kind of familiar tropes and archetypes. like the one that stands out for me is the apprentice. So mages in Myth are elementally powered, and that elemental power slowly charges their skin red. And so you can kind of see how powerful a mage is depending on how dark red their skin is and how far this and this also applies to Hurani, as their fur starts to turn into this sort of cinderous red stain. But we've also mechanically worked that in so that the charring is an interesting mechanic.
Yeah, and again, we're going to go over all these guys in a lot more detail later on down the road, but yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things for you to do with your character, one of which is your species, one is your archetype. Your archetype is kind of like your class in D&D. And we have 12 of them to choose from. We have alchemists, and we have acolytes, which are sort of like your clerics. We have your pupils, which are kind of like a particular specialized form of swordmaster. We've got swashbucklers and skalds, which are kind of like bards. So there's a bunch of them to choose from, and we will, of course, be talking about these in far more detail in the future. But just as an overview, that there is a lot of different things that you can play in the world of Myth, and these all, of course, come directly from different types of heroes in the board game.
Yep.
And we will be expanding on this list, of course, later on in the future as we go. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other ways you can make your character distinct and special. We have backgrounds which you can choose from that kind of tell you something that you did before you adventured. We have talents that are abilities you can buy that give you something just a little bit extra outside of your archetype and species and things of that nature. And there's going to be even more cool stuff, but just to keep in mind that this is a broad overview of what Myth Tales of Legend is about. So those are kind of the types of characters you can play, and we will be getting far more into detail as we go in the future. But the mechanics that set Myth Tales of Legend apart and really make it something special, that's the next thing I think we want to talk about.
Well, you want me to start with the Campfire, which is what we named the system after?
Right. The Campfire is a big deal. It's kind of a really neat way to look at how we're telling stories about our characters in the world of Myth.
And so the Campfire is this sort of meta narrative idea in the fact that the actual framework for your adventures is taking place with the heroes looking back on what they did. They're telling the stories around the campfire in the same way that you're sitting with your players at the table, virtually or physically, virtually right now, to tell their tales. And so we have this idea that these are heroes who are remembering their earlier days, their previous adventures, and their stories that they're telling around the campfire. It not only inspire them, but they inspire the people that they encounter in the world of Myth. And so Ross has designed some fun ways to bring the campfire in at various points across the like your standard adventuring session and scenario, including when you spend some of the in-game currency to re-roll. You have to be like, wait, you're telling the story wrong. Actually, like I thought that it was going to go this way, but really and you get to spend your currency to use your luck mitigation.
If you blow a roll really bad and you want to re-roll it, you can say, okay, so at the campfire, my character says, wait, that's not how it happened. And you spend your resource to re-roll and of course get a different result. So the campfire is a context for the idea that you're playing the adventure in the present, but your characters are kind of remembering it from a future date when they're sitting around that fire discussing how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
And there's an identity that's even tied into that as well, because when you are building your characters, you also build your campfire group. And one of the decisions you need to make is like, what's the name of our campfire group at that nebulous point in the future? Are we the Tavern Drinking Buddies? Are we the Heroes of the Wild? Are we the Legendary Warriors of Light? Like, what is the thing that we eventually become? And that's kind of a cool concept that you can then, of course, there's mechanics attached to the identity of your group. And that identity then, of course, will grow over time with the characters. When you level up, so does your campfire identity, and you get to tell some stories about how that evolves. but again, this is just a kind of a quick overview about how Myth Tales Legend is different, and the Campfire is a part of that. And we try to bring the Campfire in at different points in the game, but it is not meant to be. Please don't get the wrong idea. You're not just sitting here telling stories about your character, not rolling dice and killing monsters. You are doing all the things you would do in a normal role-playing game. But when the opportunity arises to do something cool, where you want to tell a piece of your character's story, or you want to sort of mention, this meta narrative, the game gives you the tools to do that, and will encourage you sometimes to do that as well.
Yeah, and we also in our quick start adventure, we use the Campfire in a way to allow the PCs to tell the story of what their heroes think is going on, and have those assumptions actually carry forward into the final act of the adventure. So instead of just
you change the adventure actually by your discussion at the Campfire. You're like, you get to talk about a particular NPC, and based on whether your group thinks he's acting out of maliciousness or just curiosity, was this a mistake or was this intentional? If your group decides one way or the other, the game master has in the adventure a guide to say, oh, well, then this adventure turns out this way instead. And the playtest worked out really well for that. So we're excited to see how people can use that Campfire mechanic in their game to change how the story goes.
Now, kind of also with the kind of the narrative side of Myth, we have things called tales. Do you want to?
Sure. So a tale is basically just a quick little story that you tell about your character, and it can be something like, I knew things had to change when I was inspired by the hero that came through my town. And you can just kind of run with that. You can decide there's something interesting about your character, but these moments are guided by a prompt. Or there's a narrative prompt that might say something like, it all began on, or whatever. And there's a dice in the board game Myth. There's a thing called the fate dice, which has these different symbols on it. And we've adopted that for the role-playing game. But in the role-playing game, those symbols, what they represent different concepts for a narrative. Like they might represent triumph or tragedy or love or greed or something along those lines. And that just gives you something to, if you want to tell a quick tale, and sometimes there will be times where the mechanics say you need to tell a quick tale for this thing to occur, you can roll the dice and get a cool prompt that will give you something interesting to say about your character at that moment. Again, this is a way for Myth to encourage you to involve narrative without making it like this onerous requirement. Like you don't have to feel like you're carrying the story on your back. Instead, it's that guy who's like, ooh, I have the chance to talk about this thing that's part of my character's backstory. And we're very interested in having characters that have cool backstories and allowing those backstories to come out during play. Tales is one of those ways to get there. Now, and in fact, during the playtest, you had a person tell a tale during one of your games.
We did, and it was a lot of fun. It was the Tavian monk, and she missed.
And she has a catchphrase.
She does. She has
a catchphrase.
Oh, so
sorry. So what?
Go for it, Dross.
We're really excited about it. Yeah. About this kid. One of the things that's fun about the character sheets in Myth is one of the entries is a catchphrase for your character. Okay. Catchphrases are just fun little ways for you to have something to say during the game. And the monk's catchphrase for the pre-generated characters says, "The wise do X while the foolish do Y," and you fill in those blanks, right, as the player. And during JM's game, one of his players wanted to tell a tale, so she rolled the dice, she got the result, she contextualized it, and she used her catchphrase to build what the tale said. And go ahead.
And actually, like, all of the players loved the idea of having a catchphrase. They were all, I will be honest, I looked through the character sheets and I handed them out, and then about like a third of the way into the game, I'm like, why do you guys keep saying these things over and over? And they're like, there are catchphrases. I'm like, oh, yes, everybody have a fate point because you deserve it for using this. But she had rolled really poorly, and she had missed hitting the kind of the big bad boss at the end of the adventure. And so she spent a fate point to re-roll her failures, and I was like, all right, well, you gotta describe, kind of looking back, what's going on. And she's like, well, I remember, as I missed, I remembered that my master taught me the wise strike twice while the foolish linger in a miss, or something to that effect. And she re-rolled and hit and actually defeated. That was the blow that defeated the boss. So it was a lot of fun.
And that's an example of how a tale can be told in the game. It's not the only way.
Right.
And, again, catchphrases are not, they're just a cool little extra thing that give your character something to do. Obviously, like you as a GM, of course, are going to be able to have a lot more impact on things, but we find them to be a fun element. Let's just say that. One thing I also think is a fun element is we have things called titles. And a title is a descriptive term for your character. It can be like Iliara the Swift, or Kraknoon the drum beater. It can be something that's just kind of adds a little flavor to your character. Now you can start with a title if you take a particular background, which is called accomplishment. But most of the time, a title is something you earn during play. It's kind of a cool way to show that your character is growing and changing and evolving over time. And it has a mechanical benefit. Once per scene, if you can apply your title towards a thing that you're doing, you get extra dice. So, for example, in our playtest I ran in Vegas, we had Bill Bridges was playing our Acolyte. And whenever the Acolyte would be praying and using his spells and things, Bill was sort of singing it. And his character is an acolyte of the Lord of the Morning, which is one of the gods in the world of myth. So at the end of the session, this is how titles work. You sort of ask the group at the end of the session as part of your wrap-up, like, do you feel like anybody has sort of earned a title? And the consensus was, yes, Bill had earned a title, and we all decided sort of together that Sunsinger was going to be his title. So he became Arthas the Sunsinger. Nice. And we were like, oh, cool. And he was able to use, that would be something he would be able to carry forward with him. Titles can even change. You can replace a title if you feel like you've outgrown it, things of that nature. But it's another thing that sort of sets Myth apart as a fantasy game, as one of the narrative elements that are involved.
You really grow from this person with a pot lid and a fire poker into a titled hero who feels like he's sort of, he or she is kind of...
Saltos the Strong
yes.
is a totally different guy than, Saltos the farm boy with his pot lid.
That's right.
So those are things that can happen in a game of Myth. But I think one of the more interesting bits is something we have. JM wrote this great introductory adventure. And as the climax of this introductory adventure, you find a boss monster, okay? And in Myth, monsters kind of separated into two categories. I mean, there's actual other categories, but from the big picture, there's named monsters, guys that have a name, okay, like Zandra Fleetfoot or Arthax the Bone Lord. And then there's guys who don't have names. They're just they might have a group name, like there's Shamblers or Crawlers or Grubbers or whatever. But those guys don't individually have names. And that means there's a big difference between those two different groups. Named monsters are supposed to be important and interesting. And the system that we have for what we call dynamic enemies is a way that you can add some cool abilities to a boss, a named bad guy, that can add a lot of things that it can make your enemy very memorable and impactful. So JM, let's talk about the dynamic enemies.
So then on top of, so as Russ said, there are mechanics that only apply if you are a named enemy. There are also ways for you to apply a template to a named enemy to make them more dynamic than just it's a named version of X. And so Ross has come up with a number of templates, things like tough and fast and cunning and commanding and
Sneaky.
Which one?
Sneaky.
Oh, and sneaky. And basically, when you apply this template, it gives the boss dynamic actions they get to take outside of sort of the normal action economy of a role-playing game, where it's my turn and then it's your turn and then it's my turn again. And so each dynamic template has a simple action that the creature gets to take, a responsive action that the creature gets to take, and then an escalating action that the creature gets to take. So in our playtest, the monster at the end of the battle is a fast creature. And so as their simple action, in addition to what they normally get to do in a turn, they get to use athletics to maneuver an opponent because of their speed into a disadvantaged position. So maybe they get a bonus or somebody else gets... What was that?
Sorry, just to be clear, we're not actually moving somebody. You're putting a condition on them. And it's because of their speed, they're so quick, is that they're going to shift you around a little bit. Just again, not actually on the map per se, but your character is going to have some kind of condition that makes it more difficult for what you need to do, or make it easier to hit you based on the things that it's doing.
Right. And so let me ask you a question about that, because this came up in our playtest. When they do, if they make it easier for, so say, say the creature uses this ability and spins the hero around and makes them dizzy, so they're off balance. Does everyone?
That's exactly what you're thinking.
Yeah. Does everyone get that bonus? If I say it's now that creature's now, or that hero's now easier to hit, does everyone get the bonus?
Yes.
Nice. All right.
Yeah. So all the minions would have an easier time hitting that guy.
Yeah.
So that's the bonus action that he gets to do in addition to its normal things every turn. One person, it can pick one enemy and be like, I'm gonna do something with this guy.
Yeah.
Because they're fast.
Right. And that's the thing, is the templates kind of reinforce this base idea of, hey, this is a fast villain, or this is a tough villain. The fast villain Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. All the abilities are themed around that that type of template that it is. So all the fast villains' abilities are based on speed and quickness of movement and things like that. So please go ahead.
So the a fast villain's response action is once per round after a hero takes an action, they get to just move away. They get a free move, no responses, nothing, when they're successfully hit by a player character. So it basically represents they run away, right? They're so fast that they get hit, and then they're not there anymore. They've moved to another part of the battlefield. Lastly, there's escalation actions, and escalation actions are once per round, and they're designed to be used sort of in like an escalating ability. But you know, as the GM, you can do sort of whatever you want with it. A fast hero, at the end of any hero's turn, once per round, first this villain gets to make one attack against an opponent within melee range, and if they hit, disarm them. So it's sort of a quick riposte, and then knocks the fire poker out of the reach of the soldier.
Right.
Then the next time they use the escalation action, they get to move up to their speed, and they get +3 defense until the start of their next turn, kind of representing they start moving even faster than the eye can follow, and it suddenly becomes harder for a limited time for the heroes to connect with the villain. And then the last one is they move so quickly that they make one attack against every hero within their speed kind of range. They just are darting around the battlefield, quick slashes, quick jabs, and hitting a large amount of people in a short amount of time. So I thought that it worked really well, because it does sort of, when the first one happens, the heroes were kind of like, wait, what's going on? And then the second one happened, and they definitely felt like, this is worse. If it happens again, it's going to be even worse. We need to focus on this villain because they're going to tear us apart.
The escalation mechanic is meant to evoke that, oh crap moment from your player character group, and there should be that dawning realization of, we have to put this guy down, right? Which that's what it's meant to do. So with the dynamic enemies being that other piece of the puzzle, we've got our campfire, we've got our tails, we've got our titles, and we've got the dynamic enemies. Those are the things that are kind of adding on to a standard role-playing game set of mechanics, which we have, that makes Myth different and kind of makes the journey of playing these novice adventurers probably a little bit different. Well, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's just a little bit more interesting than some of the games you probably played in the past. And Myth Tales of Legend is meant to be that. It's meant to be a game where you're like, okay, let's tell some interesting stories. Let's fight some interesting bad guys. Let's look at at this very classic fantasy adventure in just a slightly different way. And we're really happy to have Myth Tales of Legend be right there in that little niche.
Yeah.
Now there's of course the themes and tropes that take place in Myth are really important too. And one of the first ones is we've talked a little bit about this force called the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually two forces. There's the light and the darkness, and they have been fighting each other for ages, for untold years. These two forces have been at odds, and the light is trying to preserve, is trying to inspire, while the darkness is trying to destroy and corrupt. And this, again, straight out of the board game lore, this informs a lot of what happens in the Myth board game and in Dawn of Heroes, and now in Tales of Legend. So that's kind of like your overarching conflict is between those two forces. And kind of, I think, just because the nature of the world, this is where you keep all your stuff. You don't want to destroy it.
That's right.
The heroes are on the side of light. They are opposing the darkness. Now, anybody who knows the board game knows that there are sometimes even heroes who come from the darkness, and we will get into those at some future date. But for the moment, we're talking about novice adventurers who are helping the forces of light. So what are some other things that are important to know about Myth, Tales of Legend, and the themes and tropes?
Well, I feel like if you stayed with us this long, you might have heard us mention that stories have power, and that we've kind of built that into the mechanics because, right, that's something that's really important to me. I feel like stories do have power. There's a reason why we continue to tell stories. There's a reason why role-playing games sort of are the thing that we do frequently that brings us together to tell stories. The example I use when I'm teaching role-playing games to people is, right, you may have played a board game, and you may even think back to that one time that, like, I took Alaska from Ross in Risk, and I rolled 3 6s, and that was really awesome. But the first time you play a role-playing game together, you create a shared memory, and it's, no shit, there we were, Ross saved me from a dragon. And there's this idea that the story that we've created, the memory we've created, kind of lives on even after we're done playing the game. And so that's the whole point, right? The stories of the past, like Hearn and the Mournblade, which we'll talk more about in the next episode, inspire these heroes. And the goal with the Campfire is that these heroes' stories are going to inspire more people. And like little torches that come together, each one casts a little bit more light. And the idea that the stories that you tell and that you create at the table are preserving what light does exist in the world of myth.
Well, the idea of preservation is important too, because there are factions. There's groups in the world of myth, and one of these groups has made a big deal out of destroying or hiding knowledge. Actually, not just one group. Maybe there's multiple groups that are involved in this. I misspoke. So one of the main themes of myth is like what that preserving knowledge or destroying it is kind of like how you change the course of entire civilizations.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about the Harani earlier, how a large portion of their civilization became degenerated into these monsters, and a lot of that had to do with getting rid of and destroying their culture and eradicating their history. So the Harani are a really great example of what happens when you destroy knowledge, when you allow knowledge to become corrupted and defiled. And there are groups that are interested in preserving knowledge. And you as the heroes are going to be involved in a lot of choices and discussions. And this is going to be, one of the themes about the Campfire being that point in the future is you're actually talking about things you remember, the stories that have guided you along the way from that little torch to the big torch. So does your group intend to preserve knowledge, or is there some things that people should just not know? Like, these are questions that come up quite a bit in the world of myth.
Yeah, and they're not going to be flat or two-dimensional choices. It's not just like, well, obviously preserving knowledge is great, because both sides have points, right? The side that is like, listen, this knowledge has destroyed people in the past. It corrupts people in the past. If we want to build anything new, this stuff needs to not be on the table anymore. Whereas the other side, yes, they want to preserve knowledge and they want it out there, but in some ways they don't care who has what knowledge. I think you used the example of Wikipedia versus
Yeah. Gosh, I can't remember what the term I used at the time. Oh, the Men in Black.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the Men in Black. Hey, we do need to protect people from some things, versus Wikipedia, which is really whatever you want to put up there is fine. Like think of
Or maybe
Wikipedia without
WikiLeaks.
curating. Yeah.
Maybe WikiLeaks is a better example because they're like just knowledge should be free, information for everyone. So yeah, you can have extremes on both sides, which are bad. Anyway, this is just one of the conflicts that the characters will get involved in the world of myth. And of course, because you're such novice adventurers, because you are very, very much beginners at this, it's also about your journey. It's about that journey from the farm boy to a legend. That's why we call it Tales of Legend. And so you have to, it's about your character's growth and how they learn and grow in strength along the way. So for example, like how titles work, how you go from crappy equipment to actually good equipment to even, maybe even legendary or named gear later on in life, and that's kind of an interesting story to tell along the way as well. This is what Tales of Legend is kind of about, those things. And then lastly, I think one of the things that's really important to talk about what myth is about, there's a camaraderie in relationships between the characters themselves, like the individual characters in the group, and also about the relationships they have with outside the group, like with factions that may be supporting them or opposing them. And those things actually can grow and change over time as well. We have mechanics for, like, for example, when the group levels up and you evolve your Campfire identity, you get to tell tales about the individual, the bonds between each other. And then later on, you get to tell tales about how things outside the group interact with you and things of that nature. So you feel like your group as a group is changing as well. Not just the character leveling up and getting stronger and learning new things, but also your group is like, yeah, maybe those guys that we thought we should trust, they weren't necessarily the guys we should trust. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
We're going to get into a lot more detail of all of these things in the future, but I think that gives a pretty good overview for what Myth Tales of Legend is as a role-playing game. And, maybe in the future we'll even have a live stream game. It's possible, depends on quarantine and things of that nature. So I think in closing, let's just make sure, and everybody, don't forget that Ulysses Spiel, which is the company that is making the game, and this channel, they have shows on Fading Suns, which JM runs a Twitch game of that, and they've shifted to a quarantine model for the Twitch.
So check out the Annals of Antioch. It's just started. We're only 2 episodes in.
Right, the Annals of Antioch. There's a channel on Torg Eternity. There's a channel on The Dark Eye, and there should be a channel on, what am I missing? Fading Suns, Dark Eye, Torg Eternity. And Myth, the board game, I think should probably have its own. Yeah, if you want to know more about the board game side of Myth, you can check out their show as well. One thing I would like to ask you, if you've stayed with us this long, we're very grateful, but we want to hear from you. So be sure and leave a comment in the section below to tell us if there's something we've talked about you want to hear more about in the future. We've gone over quite a bit in some very broad terms, and we will be breaking these out to discuss them in more detail. But if there's something particular, like I want to hear you talk more about those Harani and the weird situation they got going on, for example, just let us know, and we will definitely take a look. And I think that pretty much wraps it up, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that we covered everything.
All right, so until next time,
keep telling stories.